What I can say about the world we're living in is oy vey.
From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch in New York City.
The idea of having conversations now that are fact-based and truth-oriented, that itself is now controversial. So, of course, schools should be careful about making sure every kid feels safe. An Arab kid, a Palestinian kid, Muslim kids, Sikh kids, Jewish kids should all feel safe.
On September 15th, Interfaith Alliance and a long list of partner organizations put on a summit on religious freedom in public schools. We did it in Dallas, Texas, a state that is a hotbed for religious and political incursions into public education. This week, I want you to hear highlights from that event, featuring the Beacon founder, Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, AFT President Randi Weingarten, and Skye Perryman of Democracy Forward. We need these voices to be heard now more than ever. Make sure you subscribe, share, and rate The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Taking a minute to do these things really helps other people discover our show and become listeners too. Our library of past conversations includes over 150 hopeful, empowering, and inspiring interviews with guests like American Library Association President Sam Helmick, Rainn Wilson, Rob Reiner, and many, many others. You can help grow The State of Belief with a financial contribution today. Find out how at stateofbelief.com, and you can support and join the work of Interfaith Alliance at interfaithalliance.org. Before we get started, there's something I want to get on your radar. Again, I am on the steering committee for No Kings 2, which is October 18th. This is a time when it is so important that we don't pull back. We have to lean in with courage, and especially faith communities. It's just a really important time for those of you from whatever tradition you're from to show up at your local No Kings. Already, there are twice as many No Kings locations as there were at this point for No Kings 1. And this is just a really important time. So please consider showing up for No Kings 2. Interfaith Alliance will have all kinds of resources for you to talk about why you're doing No Kings 2, to potentially have some kind of gathering for different faith communities to come together before the actual march. It's just really important. Like, No Kings is a foundational idea in our country. We don't want to have one king that has the imprimatur of one religion on top of that person. We want a country where everyone is welcome. Every faith background, every race, every gender, every whatever. We want everyone to be welcome in a democracy, not a theocracy. So please look up No Kings 2 and find a location near you. If there isn't one already in your hometown, you can start one. It's very easy. You can look at Interfaith Alliance No Kings. If you search for that on the internet, you will find all of our resources. And so we are so excited to be major participants in this, and I hope that all of you will show up for No Kings 2. And now to the Summit on Religious Freedom in Public Schools, recorded on September 15th in Dallas, Texas. Starting with remarks from Guthrie Graves Fitzsimmons, Interfaith Alliance Vice President of Programs and Strategies.
I'm filled with joy looking around the room, and I'm looking out at you as the proud product of Texas public schools. From K through 12, I was raised in Houston, and I loved my public schools. I loved being in a space where I met people of different faiths and so many different backgrounds. And it's a joy to return to Texas from my now home in Washington, D.C. to, I think, lead the charge with all of you for defending religious freedom in our public schools. What's at stake is the right of every family to decide the religious instruction of their own children. I remember growing up in Houston, and my parents were looking for a church for us. It was a big decision. And they put a lot of thought into which church to raise me in and who should be trusted with teaching me about faith. What the Texas legislature is, and legislatures across the country with the backing of the federal government, is trying to usurp that right from Texas families and families across the country who have a right to decide the religious teachings of their own families. Let's hear it for all of the amazing groups that are here in this room right now. If anyone can turn the tide on the onslaught of Christian nationalist legislation that we're seeing across the country, it is the coalition in this room that has the power to do just that.
You're about to listen to me interviewing Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum and her wife, Randi Weingarten. And I have to say, this is a couple who I admire so much for their commitment to democracy and the people. And it was just a really great honor to be with them and to talk about religion in public schools and their incredible, deep reflections on this topic.
Well, let me just say, first of all, I am so excited to be here with all of you. We view this conversation as central to what we're doing at Interfaith Alliance, and the idea of how religion can show up well and appropriately, and when it is not well and appropriate in our public schools is so important. It's collectively with our work that we do on against censorship with the American Library Association and PEN America. This is part of an opportunity for us to really be in conversation about what does it mean to be able to have our fellow Americans and our neighbors understand one another, be welcoming of one another, and imagine a future together. And education is the key to that. And as a Baptist minister who has 2 children in public education, I feel so strongly that my kids I feel so lucky that my kids are growing up being able to learn from different faith traditions, but that I get to teach them what it means to pray, and that I get to interpret sacred scripture to them, and that at the same time I'm doing that other families do that with their children, and then they come together and show the best of their tradition and share that with one another. And so I feel passionate about this for my own family, but as passionate about that for our country and for Texas, where I have to say, I'm spending a lot of time in Texas, and I love being in Texas. We have a Interfaith Alliance's board. It seems like half of our board is from Texas now, and we are delighted that that is true. I have the great opportunity and privilege of welcoming our next 2 speakers who are going to be in dialogue with one another. And this is one of those really fun moments where you really know about someone. I've been a fan of Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum for decades now, and met her a couple times, and I was very fanboy and all that kind of stuff, and I just admire her so much as a person, as a religious leader, as a generous spirit, and someone who built the largest LGBTQ welcoming synagogue in the world. But also, and in addition to that, had this incredible prophetic and generous voice into local politics and all that. And so you're like, oh God, Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum. And she probably has a spouse who's just hiding in her shadow. And I think we were at a dinner for the Interfaith Center of New York, and next to her is Randi Weingarten, who's her wife. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the coolest couple in all of America. So if I could invite Rabbi Sharon, could you come up, and if we could get Rabbi Weingarten on the screen? Sorry, not Rabbi. You're the Rabbi. Rabbi, if Rabbi means teacher, can I do it?
She's the Rebbitzin.
I'm the Rebbitzin.
Oh, there we are. Welcome, welcome. First of all, I'm going to lead with the really cool story that Randi has a book coming out tomorrow. It is Why Fascists Fear Teachers. Whew,
Yeah.
good title. Okay, so I'll just say briefly, Randi Weingarten is the president of the 1.8 million member AFT, which represents teachers, paraprofessionals, school-related personnel, higher education faculty and staff, nurses, and other healthcare professionals. So much. AFT is such an important institution in America, and we're so glad that you are here. And then, I mean, to also have Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, who is here, who has dedicated her life to promoting social justice, LGBTQ plus and human rights, and progressive values within Judaism. Please join me in welcoming Randi and Sharon, who will join us here today.
So I'm going to start.
Okay,
And then
Great.
since we have to be separated by this way. Hi, Randy. Nice to see you.
How are
I
you?
saw Randy 4 o'clock this morning when we both left New York City. She to go to DC where her office is and has to deal with all things related to the book, and me here, so we're joined together by technology. So I want to start, so I'm going to start, then Randy's going to say a few words, and then Paul, I think you're going to ask us questions and be in conversation. And I want to say how exciting it is for me to be here. I stepped down. Anybody here congregational pastors or clergy? So that we have some over here? Yep, some. So I stepped down last year after 32 years of being a congregational leader. And I like to say anybody who works in the congregational leadership position, it's really dog years. Okay, let's be honest. So I want to honor everybody here who is a leader of a congregation. It's holy and very difficult work. And now with this other chapter, I get to do things like take an invitation from Paul to be here in Texas with all of you and talk about these vitally important issues around religious freedom in public schools a week before the Jewish high holidays start. So I feel very luxurious right now that I could be here with you and not worried about, I only have to be a Jew in the pew next week, not doing that work of leadership in that form. So I believe that interfaith work is at the center of the work to save this country. So it's very, very, very meaningful for me to be here. Paul, I'm such a fangirl of yours and of the work of the Interfaith Center for a long time, since I worked at the Religious Action Center from 1990 to 92. I was the director of congregational relations there in DC for 2 years before and cared deeply about the work of the Interfaith Alliance then. And now I really appreciate that the world of religion, while it was once in silos, you know, for those of you who have ever read Will Herberg's book from the 50s, Protestant Catholic Jew, that was the definition of American religious life back then. And it was how Protestants, Catholics, and Jews lived in very siloed worlds, from schools to neighborhoods to social communities, etc. The world now, we know, of course, that was an extremely narrow and ridiculous perspective on religion. But I would argue that today the vertical lines that divide religions have been replaced by horizontal lines. And on one side are the progressive forces, the liberal forces, the forward-thinking forces within each religious tradition. And on the other side of that line are the reactionary forces of those religious traditions. So in many ways, I share more right now with progressive Baptists or Methodists or Muslims or Sikhs than I do sometimes with my own Jewish co-religionists on the other side of that line. And I believe they, on that side of line, totally understand it, and they are joining forces in ways that are creating a tsunami of hate around this world. And in some places, it's Christian nationalism. In some places, it's Jewish supremacy. In other places, it's Muslim supremacy. In other places, Hindu supremacy, etc. And we who are in this room, who have a different vision of what religion could be, we need to continually strengthen these connections and this vision. And so I'm so grateful to you, Paul, and to the Interfaith Alliance for really being a leader in that. And that's one of the deepest messages we have to offer, which is that religion strengthens each other. There can't be a supremacy in this. That's not what God has called us to do. So for us as Jews, as one of the minority religions in America, the separation of church and state has been at the center of the strength of the Jewish experience in America. Before the Constitution was passed in the late 1700s in this country, there had never been an experience of Jews in any country in which we were considered first-class citizens, where we were the minority religion. It was the first time in human history. And that was founded on that First Amendment in which there was a separation, the two clauses, of course, I'm sure I don't need to go through it here, that says there's no establishment of a religion, and that creates a sense that minority religions are protected. That gave Judaism a sense of safety here in America that we as Jews have never experienced before in human history. It's not been perfect, there's been a lot of social discrimination, et cetera, but the vision of the Constitution is that incredible protection of minority religions. That is such a profoundly radical thing. And ironically, the wall, the Thomas Jefferson wall, separating church and state, was, as the founding fathers imagined it to be, to protect the arm of the state from going into religion. The idea was that religion would be protected from the state, and that's what Thomas Jefferson understood as that separation of church and state. And any attempt, and we see them now, the drumbeat of the attempt to destroy that wall hurts religion first and foremost. The idea that the elimination of the separation of church and state will benefit religion is an illusion that we understand, and nowhere more is that visible than in the public school system and our profound institution of creating a space for the education of all children, no matter who they are, no matter what their backgrounds are, that all of our tax dollars go to the education of all students who want to go there. Now, of course, any family, and many Jewish families, choose a Jewish education so that they have a more intensive Jewish education, and they have that right to do it. But the separation of church and state has, up until this moment, made it very clear that tax dollars can't support that kind of religious education. And that has protected us as Jews, and I speak as a part of the Jewish minority here in America. Ironically, more people go to houses of worship in America than in many countries in the world in which it's a national religion. I mean, Sweden still has a national religion. You know how many people go to church in Sweden? The only time the churches are filled in Sweden, by the way, are Gay Pride Sunday. Everybody goes for the Gay Pride service, and I've been there. It's really fabulous. But the pews are packed for that service. This separation has been at the center of what's protected religion, has made it strong, and has protected public education as well. So I'll say one or two other things, and then I'll let Randi speak, and then we'll get into a conversation. So how do we communicate that effectively in a world in which religion and any attempt to say that religion, there should be limits on religion, is seen as anti-religion? That is the profound importance of those of us who are religious people speaking up with the leadership of organizations like all of yours and of the Interfaith Alliance, saying, we are religious, those of us who are. We care about religion, and we understand that that wall of the separation of church and state is essential, and public education, without the long arm of government coming in to say which religion is privileged over other religions, is essential to the healthy lives of both public education and of religion in America. Thank you. And then I'll have...
Thank you so much. Randi, we would love to hear from you now.
I want to just kind of build off of what Sharon said. Sorry, I'm not going to call her Reverend or Rabbi Kleinbaum. Sharon and I actually I think in December, wrote an op-ed that showed up in the Houston Chronicle in the aftermath of, Oklahoma doing one set of religious imposition in terms of, I think they that the superintendent decided to do the Trump Bibles and put the Trump Bibles in every classroom.
Lord have mercy.
Then you had Louisiana and Texas say that they were going to have the 10 Commandments in each classroom. Then you have all of this onslaught of vouchers, and you in Texas have been through all of this, including the fact that so many rural schools and rural school elected officials worked with Pastors for Children and our union and many of the officials. So the Republican rural officials and the Democratic urban officials worked and basically stopped vouchers 5 times before the president got on the phone and basically threatened them this time. So you see all these different swirls, but you also see the swirl, and this gets to Sharon's point, and then I'm going to go through the whys in a minute. You also see the swirl of parents, evangelical parents, I think in Tennessee, as well as in Texas, basically saying, no, do not do this. You are impairing our rights as Christians to actually educate our children in terms of religious education. So it's not just people who are Jews or Muslims. You're seeing it from all sides, as you saw Pastor Johnson do with Pastors for Children. And now you have a couple of court cases basically rejecting the placement of the 10 Commandments in classrooms. And you even had the Oklahoma Attorney General basically saying, no, you cannot use a charter for religious education, or you can't make it a religious charter school. And I go through in very quick order. Skye, I didn't do it nearly as well as you would have done it. I'm sorry. I go through in very quick order some of the litigation and some of the pushback, because what is clear as we are going through this political season right now is that the framers actually, they weren't always great on everything. Certainly not on slavery, and certainly not on women having the right to vote. But they actually understood that to create these 2 clauses in the Constitution, they understood 2 things. They understood to create these 2 clauses in the Constitution would actually create a freedom to have a free exercise of religion, which is what these evangelical Christians are actually starting to say to their states. We don't want you to actually impair our ability to decide what we want to teach our kids religiously. Do not do that. And so that's been very interesting to watch. But the second thing that the framers thought was really important, and I get to this a lot in my book, Why Fascists Fear Teachers, is that they understood that to have an enduring democracy, you had to have some kind of real education that created critical thinking and the ability of young people to discern the difference between fact and fiction, and to be able to figure out how to think, not just what to think. And I start there because even though, fast forward to the 1960s, which is when it was the first time we really had a multi-ethnic, multiracial democracy. It was the first time we really said in this country, starting with Brown versus Board of Education, and then afterwards, that everyone in this country deserves the right to learn, including undocumented children. Everyone has equal opportunity. That the corollary has to be that we create schools that are safe and welcoming for everyone. And you can imagine if a school is completely focused on one particular religion, how uncomfortable that would make other children. Now, I want to distinguish between the teaching about religion versus the teaching of one religion over others. And in some ways, we don't do as good a job as we should in the cultural work of making sure that everybody feels welcome, including the teaching about religion, about history and practices and tenets. But the key here has been for all these years, and the fight back has been fierce since Brown versus Board of Education. I'll get to that during the question period. The key has been that if we want all children to actually have a, a pathway to their own futures, to have passion and purpose meet each other, to create possibility, then we have to find ways to make all children safe and welcome. And that requires us to not have schools have one religion over another. And as I said, the founders made that clear in terms of the separation of church and state. And so when you have a 10 commandments, whether you say that's Judeo-Christian or not, what does it say for somebody who is of another religion? If you have the Bible as Bible study, what does that say for people who are of another religion or who do not decide not to practice a religion? It creates a discomfort, the same kind of discomfort as could be created in any number of other discriminatory practices. And who would I be as a Jew? How am I competent to even teach anything about Christianity? How am I competent to do that? And what happens? How would I be evaluated on that? And if I don't believe in a certain sect in the New Testament, how would I be able to be teaching it? How would that be a good idea? So I would just say that the most important reason, and then I'm going to just raise vouchers and stop. The most important reason that, separate from the Constitution, is that we make kids incredibly uncomfortable and we would impose on teachers something that they ought not be doing in terms of the teaching of something that is not only not within their bailiwick, but may not be within their belief system. And so this separation has been good for so many reasons, and the impairment of it is deeply problematic. And on this, as I said initially, the courts, even really conservative courts like the Fifth Circuit, have been with us. I'll go into vouchers during the question and answer period because it's deeply problematic, because what vouchers essentially do is they create a false choice of, of essentially saying to people, here, you can get a couple of dollars and you can use those couple of dollars to take it to any school you want to take it to. Most of the private schools have, at the same time as these vouchers have been made available, have lifted or increased their tuition so that no one with a voucher, so that their tuition is much higher than anything a voucher can pay for. But essentially, what this has meant is that it has been defunding public schools. That's essentially what it's meant. And that's what we've seen in Arizona. And that's what we're starting to see in Texas, because it's taking money that is absolutely needed in the public schools. It's part of the reason that rural public schools have fought it, because it's taking money from the tax base that kids really need and deserve, and is directing it somewhere else, mostly to people who already send their kids to private schools. Thank you.
Everybody in this room is jealous of me and will judge me because everyone wants to have this conversation with you guys, and I might not ask the actually right question that you have. But as you were speaking, I was thinking about the teachers. We often frame this as like, what about the students? What about the students? What about these kids? You really raised something important, Randi, which was like, what burden does this place on teachers who will then, who are supposed to teach about religion, and then the kid comes home and says, "Oh, this my, Mr. or Mrs. or they so and so said this about religion," and then the parent goes, "Wait, that's outrageous. That's not how I understand the Ten Commandments. That's not how I understand this prayer." La, 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 la. And it's like it's putting them in an impossible situation. I'm wondering, as AFT thought about like, what does this mean for the teaching profession, that they're being asked to do something that is essentially impossible. I'll just speak as a pastor, as a former, in one church, I can have, 10 people, 20 ideas about what, any prayer means or anything like that. How is a teacher supposed to do that?
I've never had anybody disagree with me
That's nothing like that in Judaism, I know. But what does that mean for I am curious if that is something that you as one of the safeguarders of the teaching profession have thought about this as far as the well-being of teachers.
Well, this is why I raise it, because if you start really thinking about this, and we've worked with other groups about what does this really mean, and why would you put a teacher in that position, or why would you actually have us try to substitute our judgment for that of a parent in this moment? It's just, and it is, it's untenable. And that's how, frankly, that's part of why that this is political as opposed to religious, because it's actually been parents of, parents who are religious who have raised this and who we are working with on these issues. And frankly, they are some of the people who have sued in Oklahoma in particular.
Yeah. I want to talk about something that I was very uncomfortable with, and I'm going to address the question to you, but it actually, Randi was at the center of, is accusations around anti-Semitism and the public school system, and somehow Randi was being accused or insinuated that there was an anti-Semitism underneath. If you're not comfortable speaking about this, but it is, it's something that you're an expert on and are willing to speak about. It felt outrageous as an accusation coming down, but this is the world we're living in.
Well, what I can say about the world we're living in is oy vey, right? The idea of having conversations now that are fact-based and truth-oriented, that itself is now controversial. So, of course, schools should be careful about, as Randi described, making sure every kid feels safe. An Arab kid, a Palestinian kid, Muslim kids, Sikh kids, Jewish kids should all feel safe. And that's going to be different in different communities based on what the communities are. And we're in the middle of this tremendously, what I think is actually not that complicated a battle about the Israel issues, which have bled into all different places. But what we do see is that anti-Semitism is being weaponized by this current administration and their surrogates in order to advance an agenda which has nothing to do with Jews. A very close friend of mine actually gave a great sermon recently that said, "Stop using us as your pawns." Anti-Semitism is real, and real anti-Semitism must be fought. However, most of the anti-Semitism that we really worry about in this country is coming from the right wing. That's the anti-Semitism that has killed Jews in Pittsburgh. The shooter that went into a synagogue on a Sabbath morning, some of you might remember, in Pittsburgh a few years ago. He chose that synagogue. He drove hours and hours. He chose that synagogue because he saw that synagogue as being aligned with the movement to protect refugees and immigrants. That's right. And he was deeply anti-Semitic, and he said Jews are allowing immigrants into this country without limit. That's the anti-Semitism I worry about.
Yeah.
The debate about Israel, there's a very easy way to distinguish between criticizing Israel and Israeli state policies, like any state should be open to criticism of policies, and applying it to every Jew that exists in the world. That's ridiculous. But the dangerous anti-Semitism that threatens Jewish lives right now is overwhelmingly from the right wing, often Christian, nationalist, white supremacists who see Jews as being a threat to a white Christian America that they want to enforce. And that threatens all of us ultimately, of course.
I do want to just say, like, personally, and how distressing that must have been, Randy, and how much all of us was with you, and like.
I mean, I just would say,
Well, does everybody know what happened last week?
Yeah.
I don't know that people-
Oh, yeah, maybe
just
you could
repeat- yeah.
explain, set the stage a little bit, Randy.
I mean, what is going on, and I understand that the administration just went after Open Society today and the Ford Foundation today. And, they've opened up an investigation on me and on NEA and on, and this is the second investigation that the Congress has done. So I wasn't frankly, I wasn't frankly surprised that they would attack me. But this was the House committee. I almost called it the Un-American Committee because it does have the McCarthy undertones or overtones or whatever you want to say. But the chair of the House Labor and Education Committee, when a witness was testifying, and this was, is there anti-Semitism? I don't remember the exact title, but is there anti-Semitism in unions? And the chair, when the witness was testifying about, several of the labor leaders, in history in America, including, and he listed Al Shanker, he listed Jewish labor leaders, and he listed Al Shanker, and then he listed me. I'm one of the last of the major Jewish labor leaders in our right now. And the chair said, made some derogatory comment that said, "Don't get up my ire." She has never said a word addressing or about anti-Semitism, which was so palpably false that what we just decided to do, a little bit of humor never hurts, is we just did a tweet thread of, I don't know, 10 of the times that I had talked about and addressed anti-Semitism, including suggesting to him that he should go back to Grok. When you ask Grok whether or not I've ever addressed anti-Semitism, even Grok, one of the, Elon Musk's, AI platform, would tell you front and center that I had. But it's the kind of propaganda and smearing that, to create fear. And that's the kind of fascistic behaviors that I talk about in my book, but it's also, what do teachers do to address it? We have to not hide, and we have to not pretend, or get fearful. We have to just be the antidote to it. And why did I do the tweet thread? Not for him, but I did it for all those Jews and for all those others who felt, oh, maybe he's right. No, of course he's wrong. But we have to make sure that we meet people where they are and make sure we try to address the mistruths and not let the propaganda that get the best of us.
Let me ask you one more kind of question that I think it comes up, is that a lot of these imposition into public schools and the effort at defunding or moving towards vouchers, are they ultimately trying to destroy public schools for good? I mean,
Yes.
like, is that really the
Yes.
goal? It seems to me that in some ways this is like, termites, but actually like big termites who are trying to undermine the basic foundations of our public school system, which is, I think, would be one of the telltales of the end of our democracy. So I'm curious, like, Randy, I'll address that to you, and then I have a final question for you.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are so many indications, there's so many examples of what they're doing and probably why. But let me take it to this one piece. Someone like Christopher Rufo, who is one of their academic intellectuals. Somebody look at Project 2025. What they're trying to do is undermine the foundation stones of society. And one of the foundation stones of society is public education. Another is actually government that works for us, works for the people. And what's happening is, if you have ICE agents with masks on who just run into a school or into an industry, into like the Hyundai factory, and just take people who are working hard for a living, or take a child, it's undermining, it's creating a fear of government. It's making you fearful of government rather than thinking that government can work for you. And one of the most important ways government in America works for us, and it's over 50 states and 5 territories. There's not a national education system. It is a state-based system that Jefferson believed in, that Washington believed in, that Madison believed in, that Franklin believed in, because they understood that if kids were educated, if kids could critically think, that would be the best defense against tyrants. But take it to the next step, which means that schools then become the center of community, that schools then become where you create where you create understanding about diversity and inclusion. And even if you disagree with your neighbor, you respect your neighbor, you think about your neighbor as a human being. If you get rid of that, if you stop schools from being the public square, from being the center of community, where else do you create that social covenant with people in America? Where else? And so their attempt to have vouchers, to basically balkanize schools, to defund schools, is bigger than them just not wanting to educate all kids. It is about fractionalizing and balkanizing society. And that's what we have to fight against. We have to fight for pluralism. We have to fight against this polarization. And we have to fight for, just like we must condemn political violence in all of its aspects, we have to fight for an ability to talk to each other and to believe in America as a concept, and believe in America as a humane place where everyone is treated with dignity and respect.
Wonderful.
I think I'm
beginning to understand why fascists fear teachers. I want to end with a question for you, Rabbi, because I know that after a long tenure as a congregational rabbi, you've started something called the Beacon.
Yes.
And I want to be able to lift that up in front of everyone. It's really a wonderful effort to encourage everyday people to show up. In this fight for religious freedom for all and strong public schools, how do you imagine, as someone who's really looked at social movements and imagines how we should show up, what's the advice you give us how to show up right now? In what way can every person from whatever tradition we come from show up for our public schools and for our teachers and for our education system? And unfortunately, you have like 2 minutes.
So I think the key thing that undermines the kind of authoritarianism that's spreading worldwide, not only here, it's a global issue, is strengthening local communities. And to not just see that this isn't just a battle that should take place in the capitals of the countries or of this country or of our states, but really it needs to be happening in our neighborhoods. And that's one of the powers, as Randi points out, that schools provide, which is just all these different laser focus on neighborhoods. And the Beacon, which is a project of Union Theological Seminary now, is trying to get people in our own neighborhoods for 30 minutes a week in a very ritual way, stand out in our neighborhoods, not travel to the capitals, whether it's rural or urban or suburban or in front of your house or on a corner, with signs that everybody's making about what their vision of America is or what they're objecting to this week. It could be 2 people. We don't have to wait for huge numbers.
Right.
And in this way, this focus on local, the focus that anybody can do it, you can do it in a wheelchair, you can do it if you're 8 years old, and that we have to take this, not let the streets and our local communities be taken over by fear. And we call it the Beacon because all traditions understand the power of lighting light, and that each of us starts with a small flame, encourages each other, and by feeding each other, we create the light that's going to carry us into the future. And without that light, there is no future. Even if we personally don't live to see it, we are now, with our public schools, with our commitments to communities, creating the foundation for a future. How will the children in 100 years study this period of time? What will they see in what we're doing in taking back and creating the power of that light?
Please join me in thanking both Rabbi Sharon and Randi. And best of luck, Randi, with your book.
Thank you.
And everybody
Thank you.
needs to buy it.
Thank you.
Up next, much more from the Religious Freedom in Public Schools Summit. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. You'll also find links to topics we discussed this week, as well as transcripts and more. And make sure you subscribe, share, and rate The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. Welcome back to The State of Belief. I'm Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch. Here's Skye Perryman of Democracy Forward, as heard at the Summit on Religious Freedom in Public Schools in Dallas, Texas.
It's so good to be here and to see you all tonight. Today is International Democracy Day. Did you know that? It's International Democracy Day. It's the 18th year of International Democracy Day, which is a designation by the UN. And the reason that's significant, and I want to bring it into this space, is that for about 2 decades now, in the United States, but also across the globe, as we look across the globe, more countries have been moving towards autocracy than moving towards democracy. So I'm going to say that again. For the last 2 decades, and we're celebrating the 18th year of International Democracy Day, more countries in this world have been moving towards autocracy as opposed to democracy. So the post-World War II, post-Cold War vision that we were somehow approaching the end of history and that countries were going to start moving to free and fair representation and to greater democracy is no longer a reality. And we have been amidst a paradigm shift across this world for some time. In 2021, the United States was added to a list of global backsliding democracies. So I will say that again. In 2021, not 2025, not 6 months ago, in 2021, the United States was added to a list of global backsliding democracies. And it was not the president's attempt to overturn the results of a free and fair election that landed us on that list. It is what got international researchers to start paying attention to what was happening in America. But when they looked at what was happening here, what they found was rising state and local extremism, misinformation and disinformation. They found courts that instead of protecting people's right to vote and people's individual rights were more often than not at the US Supreme Court reversing that. That didn't start in 2021 either. You remember the Shelby versus Holder decision some years prior, dismantling core sections of the Voting Rights Act. And then you have what happened in the aftermath of January 6th, which is that we had an attempt to overthrow a free and fair election, and the United States Congress did nothing to prevent that from happening again. Those factors landed us on that list. And we remained on that list and remain on that list every year since. Those of you that are from Texas or from other states here who have dealt with extremism at the state level, you don't have to be told all of this because you lived it. You're living it. I grew up in Texas and I'm a proud product of K through 12 public schools too. And we have lived that here, but now it is affecting the rest of the country. And if you look at it globally, you find that we are just part of a statistic now, a statistic that has got to be reversed. So the question last November was not whether we were going to be able to propel ourselves to some place we've never been before. It was whether our backsliding democracy was going to slow down its backslide and maybe be able to turn around, or whether our backsliding democracy was going to move into a rapidly accelerating autocracy. We know where we are, and we know what we're seeing. And so whatever you believe, whether you consider yourself liberal or conservative or moderate or independent, it doesn't matter now. This is for all the marbles, and this is a global democracy fight. But the title of my talk, which is going to be very brief, is about how fighting for democracy is at your own front door. So what does this have to do with all of this global conversation? The acceleration into autocracy follows a similar playbook, whether you were here or whether you were across the world, whether you were living in 2025 or whether you were living in the 1930s. It's a similar playbook. Try to divide people, point out and try to demonize people, get people to deny their common humanity, convince people that somehow we don't all want our kids to go to a good school that's safe. Everybody wants that. But let's try to pit people against each other and find issues to give and build distrust among people, to burn and ban books, to attack universities, to attack lawyers and judges, and to engage in misinformation, disinformation. That's been the playbook for some time. And it's a common playbook. And how you confront that playbook is not with the perfect legal case. There wasn't a single legal case that was going to take Germany out of where it was in the 30s. They had good lawyers too, that cared a lot, right? There wasn't a single politician that was going to be elected. To get out of where we are and to get out of where we have been is going to take the people. And so the fight for democracy is a local fight. It is a local fight with profound global consequences. Every time someone comes into your school and tries to pit you against someone, or tries to remove a book, or tries to suggest that maybe if we could just all agree that we're all going to think the same way, everything would be okay. And you're being a little extreme to suggest that maybe we should be exposed. Every time that happens, that is an attack not only on you and your community and our values as Americans who value democracy, it is an attack on a global democratic system. And we see it everywhere. And so what we have seen at Democracy Forward throughout our work, which is in large part in state and local communities, now everybody's reading about it on the national scale, is that the true champions of this moment are people who are here, in this room, in local communities. I'm here today with my best friend, who's a mom of 4 Texas public school kids, and has been incredible in advocating in her community before the PTA, and if the PTA won't do it, go somewhere else, here in Dallas, in order to speak out and make sure every kid is served. The Cooperative Baptist Fellowship is here. They have gone to court with us to keep ICE from entering their houses of worship, Baptist churches, and the Interfaith Alliance helped facilitate a lot of the awareness that is being raised about what ICE is doing in churches. They look like me and you. They look like our communities. They're not the face of a big, powerful senator or of a Supreme Court justice. They are people doing this work. And we also know, we just heard from Randi, the American Federation of Teachers has been on the front lines with us. You'll see something will get filed soon. You'll see another one. But we have blocked attempts because educators have shown up and parents have shown up in court every single day, even in this environment, to keep public school funding and to oppose attempts to try to assimilate every kid, every family, every teacher into one thing that the president finds acceptable. And so that's what's happening. In the last about 230 days of this administration, more than 400 lawsuits have been filed. In the cases where we've been able to win for public schools, we've been winning before judges that President Trump himself appointed. The case that Randi and I and our teams won to block what's called the Dear Colleague letter, which was a ransom letter to educational systems across the country, saying if you don't agree with the president's view on civil rights, you don't get your federal funds. We've won and blocked that, and we won before a judge that President Trump himself appointed. This is beyond politics. But when we see those news stories, what's fueling it is people in courthouses, in communities, in schoolhouses, and in houses of worship. And so it is such an honor to get to be here today to kick off what is going to be doing the real work of coming together and learning from each other. What can we learn from experts? What can we learn from community members? What can we learn from people who have different lived experiences and backgrounds? And how can all of us participate in our democracy? So thank you so much to Paul and the Interfaith Alliance and Guthrie and the whole team for having us here. There were lots of references to the Constitution. So this is just sort of like a week. Today's International Democracy Day, and September 17th, which is later this week, is Constitution Day. Is the day that the Constitution was signed 238 years ago. That Constitution, even though we're a relatively young country, is the longest and oldest charter of a government that is still in place. So when you look at these global statistics, and then you look what's happening in your community, you feel like it's all on your shoulders. It kind of is. Because what happens here matters. You heard the rabbi say, this was the first country where Jewish people were considered anything other than a second-class citizen. All of that's up for grabs right now because of attacks on our Constitution. So thank you for having me, and thank you to the Interfaith Alliance for bringing all of us together. We're going to get really local, we're going to get really tactical about schools, about what we can do, about public education, about religious freedom, but just remember all of that is part of not just a local fight. It is a local fight with massive global consequences. So thank you for being part of the fight, and thank you for having me here.
Who do you know who would get a lot out of this discussion? Please share The State of Belief with them, and be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. We need help growing The State of Belief, so please make a financial contribution today at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. The State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.